Welcome to the Gaudium et Spes podcast, where every other week we bring you Catholic teachings and stories of faith from people throughout the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. Now, here are your hosts, Suzanne McNinch and Chez Filippini.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Gaudium et Spes podcast. I got a long-lost friend here. He's been gone gallivanting around Europe and opening new retreat centers and all these kinds of things. Luke, Dr. Arredondo, it's good to have you back, man.
Good to be back. It's always a good day when I get to just sit down and talk about an encyclical for a while, and that's work. That's a good job, man.
That is good, yeah. We're going to be talking about work today, just like always. We are back for another installment of the Catholic Social Teaching Series. We had a little excursion while you were off gallivanting. Magnifica Humanitas dropped, I think the day you landed in Rome or something like that?
Yeah, it was a few days. I had been there a few days, enough that I had recovered and was like, I'm going to read this sucker today.
Oh, that's right.
You know, so... yeah, but I wasn't able to be here for that conversation. Yeah. So
we've had two great episodes on that new piece of the Catholic social teaching fabric of the Church. We had it with Dr. Neil and another guest, a professor, just talking about just kind of our initial reactions. Then Bishop Walk did his own digestion of what this means for him. He had just come off the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops meeting, and they had like a special session after the meeting was over on AI. Right. And so he was like, no, I'm all in. I'm ready to go for it. It's a great episode. So yeah, check it out. We're going to be back though in our proper order of things today with another John Paul II encyclical, Centesimus Annus, which is 100 years after the whole shindig started.
The centenary anniversary of Leo XIII.
Yeah.
You know.
This is like everything. We were going to record this a couple days ago, and Luke was like, I don't know, man. It's just a little too rich. I got to take my time to this thing.
Yeah.
Unless it is proved true. It's a masterpiece. There's been a few masterpieces in this so far, but as far as timing, depth, the historical overview, it's pretty awesome. We're going to try and do justice just today. But yeah. That's where we're at. We're 100 years into this sucker, and 35 more to go until we catch up to the present day. There's more to come, but
that's right. Yeah.
All right. Just tell me though, how's your summer been going? We'll start there.
It's been a pretty good summer.
Yeah.
Got to go to Rome and go to Poland. So, the University of Notre Dame's got a project that funded part of that trip. So I got a week in Rome. Then my wife joined me at the end of that week. We got to spend a few days in Rome. Then we went to Poland to make a pilgrimage. So I got to see where John Paul II was, the house he grew up in, the church he was baptized at, and then I got to see his tomb. And I got to see the John Paul II Center in Krakow, which is right across from the Divine Mercy Shrine. So I've had a pretty cool summer. I was probably not going to be able to do something like that again. But it was just extraordinary. And all the churches in Rome that we got to visit, me and Dave Kimball, the CFO, we got a sort of an insider's tour from one of the priests in our group who had lived in Rome for 3 or 4 years. He took us on a breakneck, hour and a half walk where we're bouncing around from here's a church. Look, go in the back corner on the left. There's a Caravaggio. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's the Call of Matthew. And then he's like, all right, you get 5 minutes with that. And then we got to go somewhere else. And a few minutes later, he's pushing us into a little side altar at church. He says, gentlemen, pray for your wives. That's the tomb of St. Monica right there. And then we literally stumbled out of curiosity into some cool looking church. There's the tomb of St. Cecilia from the 200s. It was just unbelievable. All the tombs and all the popes that I got to pray at their tombs, and then all the saints whose tombs I got to visit: St. Francis of Assisi, Ignatius of Loyola, of course John Paul II, Benedict XVI, St. Paul VI, John the 23rd, Pius X, Pius IX. I mean,
they're all there.
They're all over there. I got to see Pope Francis's tomb. It was extraordinary. Just truly, it's not. It's going to take me years to really digest all that happened in the span of like 16 days. It was awesome.
You were in Krakow for Corpus Christi, right?
Yes, yeah. It was a rainy day, and I went to Wawel Cathedral, and there were like couple thousand people hanging outside. It was a procession, goes all the way through the town. The streets are blocked off.
Wow.
Places where you normally have to pay for parking are free. It's a big deal. They had a brass band, which was really cool. And it's unbelievable choir singing, like Mozart mass parts or something. It was awesome. Even though it was raining, we got there early enough to be under a covered area with just a whole bunch of nuns. So it was me and my wife and 50 nuns who were just sheltered from the rain for the mass. And then when the procession started, we took part as long as we could. But it was really just a real grace in our lives. So, and I brought back 300 rosaries blessed by Pope Leo. So got gifts for a while. Yeah, I got to make them last, but I got 300 of them, so it's pretty good. Cheap rosaries, but blessed by the Pope. So, you can't beat that.
Priceless. That's amazing. Thanks for catching me up on that. That's great, and just so cool that we're in the midst of talking about John Paul II. You got to visit this. You had mentioned in the last podcast that you're like, I'm going there, and now
it's hard to believe that. Yeah, still hard to believe that I went.
Yeah,
really
cool. Well, if you didn't catch our last episode, we did Laborem Exercens, which is 1981. That's John Paul II's first social encyclical. It's on the dignity and the meaning of work in light of Christian anthropology and theology. We did the bio of his life for that one. His extraordinary, outrageously, unfathomably impactful, grace-filled life. We're going to just catch up on where we're at. So it's 10 years from that one. It's 1991 with Centesimus Annus. He's had his
what a 10 years, huh?
So this is crazy. He recovers the assassination attempt and he releases this, and then he embarks on what we would call, if you think of John Paul II as the rock star, well-traveled, I mean, not just well-traveled, outrageously traveled. The 80s are his heyday.
Yeah.
When he's still in very robust health, despite the assassination attempt, the Parkinson's that will afflict him later on hasn't hit yet, manifested itself. Mm-hmm. Just want to go over just the traveling, the extent of traveling that he does in the 1980s is just outrageous. He's got 44 official trips during this time, but within these trips, some of them times he's going to 10 different countries, or he's in one country and he goes to 10 different cities while he's in this country.
In 1987, I know he came to New Orleans and San Francisco, and so Chez and I were talking. I said, well, I know he went to New Orleans. I'm pretty sure San Francisco. Chez looks it up. It's like, oh, yeah, on that trip he hit Miami, New Orleans, San Antonio, Phoenix, San Jose, Los Angeles, San Francisco. It's just an insane apostolic voyage.
Yeah.
He signed a baseball for one of the Giants players. He signed it JP2.
That's right. You mentioned that last time, which is just legendary. It's just some of the places he goes in Asia and the Pacific. He's going to places like South Korea, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Thailand. He's going to the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Guatemala, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, Benin, Nigeria, Portugal, all the classic Catholic countries too. He gets in there. Zaire, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Morocco, Liechtenstein, India, Colombia, St. Lucia, France, Bangladesh, Singapore. It's just outrageous.
Yeah.
And he is doing things like I think some of these memorable scenes you'll have during this time this year, the Reagan and John Paul II moments together, or walking in the Vatican Gardens and stuff like that.
Isn't there a visit where he's at an elementary school with like Nancy Reagan or something, and there's like little kids being presented? I don't know. It was kids. It's there's certainly visits where he visited elementary schools, and there's just the kids are asking him goofy questions like if he has papal pajamas and stuff. Like, awesome. It's like that's what everybody wants to know, but you got to get a kid to ask it. Go ask the Pope a question.
He could handle anything though. You put him in any situation, he was going to be like, he was going to be awesome.
Well, I think I'm sure I mentioned this before, but I call him the Catholic Forrest Gump because he seems almost like a fictitious character. Places that he would be at the moments that he would be, and the way that he would happen to have the perfect way of responding. Like it wouldn't make sense as a story.
Yeah.
You'd be like, this doesn't. Come on, man. I'm not gonna watch that movie, but it really happened. So you kind of got to deal with it.
Oh man. In the midst of all his travel, he does the first World Youth Days. 1987 is the first World Youth Day.
Where was the first one?
Buenos Aires,
Okay.
actually. And then he did another one in Spain at Santiago de Compostela in 1989. He releases the new Code of Canon Law in 1983. He's got a few encyclicals in the meantime here. Another social encyclical, which we skipped over, which is Solicitudo Rei Socialis. That's on the 20th anniversary of Populorum Progressio. He also has Dominum Vivificantum on the Holy Spirit, which is, y'all Catholics, if you're just like, I don't know about the Holy Spirit, read that one. Read that encyclical. It is a great exposition. Redemptoris Mater on the Blessed Virgin and the life of the mission of the church, and then Redemptoris Missio. So he's writing, he's governing, he's rock starring, he's going everywhere.
Gosh.
And then we get this encyclical. So 100 years he's charged with summarizing where we've been, what the impact of Catholic social teaching is. And he presented, just real quick, getting the encyclical here in paragraph 2. This present encyclical is part of these celebrations, which are meant to thank God, the origin of every good endowment and every perfect gift, for having used a document published a century ago by the See of Peter to achieve so much good and to radiate so much light in the church and in the world. So this is a theme of John Paul II's pontificate, big celebrations. And he's going to he's going to throw the ultimate party for the year 2000.
Yep.
And then all these World Youth Days and stuff like that. So, where would we start with this thing?
Well, it's a 100-year anniversary, and like every other document that we've looked at, they all kind of programmatically begin with some words about Leo XIII and what he accomplished or what he set in motion. And what John Paul II kind of tries to show in this encyclical is, look, in 1891, Leo XIII is looking at some very particular question of the worker problem, the problem of the relation between labor and capital in the context of the Industrial Revolution, with a certain understanding of what rights man had and what work should look like and what ownership and private property looks like. He mentions in here, in Leo's time, that was understood as to own land, and today we're in a slightly different situation. So he does a beautiful reflection on it. But what he gets to the heart of is that Leo XIII wasn't just worried about wages and working conditions, even though clearly he was. Mm-hmm. That Leo's bigger concern is the ideological commitments that were causing some of the sort of the tension, right? That we're leading some people to say, hey, look, here's a problem with wages and working conditions, and the solution to that is going to be class warfare or the elimination of the rich to change everything to common ownership and all that. And what John Paul II wants to sort of say in these opening pages is, we had some good progress, but it's not the case that entire ideology just fell apart overnight in the beginning of the 20th century. That what progress was made and what progress continues to be made still is reckoning not necessarily with the Industrial Revolution, but with a much bigger question about ideological commitments and specifically what those different ideological views have to say about what a person is. Mm-hmm. So if I had to say what's one thing this entire document is about, it seems to be, to me, about what is a person.
Yep.
What is the anthropology that we need to get right in order to have any kind of fruitful discussion or possibility of solutions for the many problems besetting the world.
Yep. His summary is exactly on that. It is this, he talks about, you'll see the words in here, socialism a lot, Marxism a lot. He's doing kind of like, Pope Leo was right on the cusp of these things developing, and 100 years later, we have really seen in real time how these things play out. And he spends a lot of time talking about, he'll return, every fifth or so paragraph to this paradigm of, but the real weakness of these systems is the fact that man is alienated from his relationship to the truth.
Yeah.
He misunderstands his own freedom. He totalizes his entire way of being in the world in terms of categories like class and markets and the ordering of society.
Or even in materialist societies or well-developed Western nations that aren't, suffering poverty in tremendous rates, enjoyment and ownership. He says having rather than being. So there's an interesting dichotomy between obviously the serious problems of Marxism, or what he calls real socialism. He uses that term, which has an atheist underpinning and a certain sort of anthropology. Or on the other side of the dichotomy is, what about the super rich Western countries that are powerful and have expendable incomes? What kind of problems are we seeing there? And so what he's trying to point out in both cases is, again, it's anthropology, but it's the idea that we can't resolve any of these social problems of whatever sort, whether they're the 100-year-old ones or the new ones, without giving real attention to what a person is. And you mentioned truth and freedom, getting a coherent conception of the truth or the role of truth in society, and an understanding of freedom, the freedom of man in himself. It's a real rallying call for getting the anthropology question right, like the foundation. Like, I don't know how to build anything, but it seems like he's talking about a bunch of people building a bunch of different kind of houses on a really terribly done foundation. It's like you tear the house down and put up another one, but leave the foundation there. It's not going to work.
So he wraps up the summary of Rerum Novarum around paragraph 16, and as you said already, like, he recognizes, like, it wasn't totally received as it should have been, and we've been struggling ever since. I'll just read a quote here at the end of paragraph 16. Thus, as we look in the past, there is good reason to thank God that the great encyclical was not without an echo in human hearts, and indeed led to a generous response on the practical level. Hooray, thumbs up. People did something with Rerum Novarum. Then he says, still, we must acknowledge that its prophetic message was not fully accepted by people at the time. Precisely for this reason, there ensued some very serious tragedies. And then he does kind of like this, a little bit of a historical wrap-up, because this moment that he's writing is a very serendipitous, providential moment to write about the 100th anniversary, is because in the midst of this happening, we have the falling apart of the Soviet Union that he had been rightly working toward as the Pope, as an international figure, alongside some very powerful allies such as Ronald Reagan, as we already mentioned. But he's like, look, we've been dealing for 100 years with the fact that people fundamentally ignored the Holy Father's original message. And then he goes and talks about the wars that ravaged Europe, World War I and World War II. And then he doesn't say, like, but then we achieved peace for all time. He's like, no, these ideologies ended up hardening our hearts towards one another in the post-war era. And he talks about the idea that this that the peace that we had after 1945, it must be remembered that true peace is never simply the result of military victory, but rather implies both the removal of the causes of war and genuine reconciliation between peoples. For many years, there has been in Europe and the world a situation of non-war rather than genuine peace. Half the continent fell under the domination of a communist dictatorship, while the other half organized itself in defense against this threat. It talks about people were essentially, again, the individual is sunsetted and eclipsed in this titanic struggle between these ideologies, and it played out in real time. It had reached this culmination point. But yeah, anyhow, thoughts on that? I would say this: if you're looking for a summary, like a big picture of what this all meant, this post-war period, paragraphs 18 and 19 in this document are exceptional summaries of a man who lived the worst of these things, and then as this world figure got to observe it from the top down. So,
well, I think just sitting down for a minute and talking about the anthropological question at the root is helpful. What he's saying constantly in reference to different historical periods, and then the contemporary or the new questions of 1991, is that we've got to get this right. What is a person, right? Mm-hmm. So his fundamental, impulse, which we talked about for sure when we talked about Paul VI, Populorum Progressio, a human being is not merely an economic instrument. who can work and own things and purchase things. Right? A human being should be constituted as free, as free to pursue the truth. Should recognize and be treated as someone created in the image and likeness of God. And he goes to Gaudium and Spes 24. Man is the only creature on earth that God willed for its own sake. And it's only when we recognize that we're created by God, that our creation and our life is a gift, that the world is a gift that was created for us, that we are supposed to have stewardship over, and that our work should be personal, all the stuff we talked about in Laborem Exercens. So we, this personal dignity element of our work, a real ownership, like that has to be the foundation of how you understand the person. And then you have to go from a person to communities, from communities to states, and think from states to an international organization of, what's wrong with the world. You can't go in the opposite direction, and you especially can't go in the opposite direction assuming that a person doesn't have a spiritual nature, doesn't have a spiritual destiny. He uses this language that, Marxism or atheism, or the atheism underlying Marxism, I forget exactly how he words it, tried to root out the desire for God from the human heart, to just sort of pull that out like you're playing Operation. Just pull that out, leave the person alone, but take out the desire for God from their heart. And he says, it has been discovered that this cannot happen without causing turmoil for the human heart. Like that is the real big problem at the root of, even in Leo's time, liberalism that he talks about, the Marxism that was happening in Leo's time. And John Paul II saw it up close. That didn't go away. It didn't disappear. It suffered wounds, but was sort of still kind of carrying on for quite a lot of these 100 years between 1891 and 1991. So I think that's the foundational piece. Is we've got to understand what man is to get everything else right, and that connects also to freedom and to truth. So he's very harsh on the totalitarian regimes that don't allow various forms of freedom, whether that's freedom of employment, conscience, religion, or freedom to form families. There's some beautiful remarks in here about the function of the family as a sanctuary of life, and that even people in developed Western societies today are still sort of under this weird burden of a regime that doesn't allow the family to be the primary focus. But it's all touching the anthropological question, which for him is all, as a personalist, is always first and foremost. And
if you're trying to picture what is John Paul II's attitude or position as he's at his desk writing these words down, I kind of I see somebody who's trying to tone down the potential we'll get to it in a second here. There's a moment that he's addressing in which it's 1991. We're months away from the final dissolution of the Soviet Union. So this is the moment when republics are breaking away. And it all started in 1989. He has a whole section of this encyclical that says 1989. And
it has nothing to do with that Taylor Swift album either. Right? This is a much better 1989. Just read this one. You don't need to listen to that trash.
Taylor Swift's a friend of the show, friend of the podcast, so I can't endorse my colleagues here entirely on that one. But you're right, Taylor Swift.
It's amazing I even know that's an album.
Yeah.
That's, you didn't see that one coming. Luke even knows there's an album called 1989. No, John Paul II's 1989 treatment here is unbelievable.
Yeah,
because he saw all of these things playing out around him, and he's a citizen of that part of the world.
Yeah,
that's why I say he's a Catholic Forrest Gump. He lived in a Nazi-occupied country, and they lived in a communist-occupied place for years. Even impacted his travel to the Second Vatican Council. It's unbelievable stuff.
When we see the words 1989, it's not just Taylor Swift's birthday, and this is a parallel between this encyclical I see and the Magnificat Humanitas, which is trying to not just talk about the Church's vision for all time, kind of evergreen. It's for a moment. It's this moment. And the moment is, in 1989, the Berlin Wall falls, which is seen by many as the first decisive moment that the Soviet Union, the bastion of real socialism, is gonna disintegrate, that it's not gonna work as a project. And there's this tremendous, you have David Hasselhoff, famously,
I do know who that is.
Yeah, the Baywatch star, Knight Rider.
Yeah.
He speaks German and English, and he's like, he's at the Berlin Walls is falling, it's kind of like punk rock, American Western values triumph moment as Berliners take down this symbol of separation, communist hardline oppression, and then the people have decided the world should open up. Right?
Yeah.
And if you did. I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here. The Berlin Wall is a fascinating instantiation. It's it's a pop culture memory for some of us who are elder millennials. I think for our kids, they'll be like, "What? There was a wall in Berlin," and it is this very hard thing to explain.
I got to tell you, I don't even know where Berlin is.
Okay,
so for me, it's a little removed. I know I've seen the image,
and
I'm like, "Yep, that's the Berlin Wall." Whatever that is, that it was that. So I'm pretty dumb historically. So if Chez is teaching me right now,
we're gonna try and do it because it's so important to understand as this kind of the system and the way John Paul II is speaking is. So the end of World War II, 1945, the Germans are overrun from the east by the Soviets and the west by the Americans and the British and their allies, and they meet pretty much right in the middle of the country at the end of the war in April and May 1945. But Berlin is far to the east, and it's well inside the territory that the Soviets take over.
Okay.
And that whole territory they take over in the east part of the country becomes East Germany. And then the part that the Allies take over is West Germany.
Okay.
But within East Germany is Berlin. And the Allies decide with the Soviets at the end of the World War II that it shouldn't just be absorbed into East Germany. Berlin itself needs to have 4 different zones of occupation. One is East Berlin, so one city, East Berlin, controlled by the Soviets, and then a British zone, an American zone, and a French zone on the other side. That's West Berlin.
It's like Texarkana.
It is. It is a bizarre arrangement, right?
Okay.
And within a few years, you had the Berlin airlift in 1948 and 49, in which there was a clear angle by the Soviets that they wanted to pinch off this Allied zone within Berlin and eventually absorb it entirely East Germany. The Allies don't let them do that. They ship supplies into the city. The Soviets back off. And very quickly, within Berlin itself, as West Germany is recovering economically far more rapidly than East Germany from the ravages of the war, you see this parallel that is like, I think the democratic capitalistic society,
it works better.
It's just doing better.
Yeah.
And then Berlin itself became this flashpoint because they did it in miniature in Berlin. The east side of Berlin was this kind of draconian east.
Yeah.
And then the west side of Berlin, even though it's in East Germany, is doing great.
Yeah.
And they had this constant stream of East Berliners who would flee to West Berlin, and the Soviets constantly trying to keep them back on their side of the street.
Okay.
And then finally, in 1961, the Soviets said, that's enough of that. We're building a wall. And they just built a wall around.
Oh, the wall wasn't built for almost 20 years?
Yeah, 1961.
They were just like, y'all stay over there?
That's right.
Jeez.
And they were so sick of it, and so many border guards and too many national embarrassments, international embarrassments. People are just like, you see these images like in the 50s of, people with sacks around their shoulder, and they just crossed into West Berlin.
Yeah.
So they finally said, no, they built a wall pretty quickly around the entirety of West Berlin. So they still are there. You still have your American, British, French, West democratic zone.
But no crossing over.
Yeah. And they have very limited access points. It becomes this symbol for the next 28 years of just the absurdity.
Yeah.
People as John Paul II here say, the events of 1989 are an example of the success and willingness to negotiate and of the gospel spirit in the face of an adversary determined not to be bound by moral principles. These events were a warning to those who, in the name of political realism, wish to banish law and morality from the political arena. Undoubtedly, the struggle which led to the changes of 1989 called for clarity, moderation, suffering, and sacrifice. In a certain sense, it was a struggle born of prayer, and it would have been unthinkable without immense trust in God, the Lord of history, who carries the human heart in his hands. And that's kind of how the world saw, that was like broadcast live on television. These people, by their own sense of dignity, freedom, desire for flourishing, desire for unity, that these families that were separated in their city by this wall, they were like, no. And they just kind of took it down with their bare hands as an act of individual kind of and solidarity amongst themselves over and against this regime. And it's this triumphant moment that then sets off the tidal wave of most of the Soviet republics were like, we don't have to do what Moscow says. And they start breaking away and breaking away and breaking away. And on the Western side, we're like, see, we told you, consumeristic, capitalistic freedom is always going to win, and it's the only way forward. And then you get this sense I get throughout the rest of this encyclical. It's like, yeah, it's good. Be careful.
Yeah.
You best not think that you can just kind of rely on your economic and political system to carry the day in all things, because you are still lacking in all of these realities.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where he starts to wind it down. So I bet he felt good in his office, like, yeah, I'm pretty happy the wall came back. We know he did, you know. Of course. But it can't be this exultant, like, that's all we got to do. It's the end of history. We're done. You know? Very much that sense there. So, yeah. Anyhow,
so there's another angle to this too that he brings up time and time again is, you know, the idea that the most totalitarian, you know, ideologically driven regimes which get the concept of the person wrong, they can only function when they have an enemy that they're targeting, when they have an enemy that they've caricatured as the source of all problems, that we got to rally, not just rally our people in an identity against them, but through violence and war, eliminate them. So that the ideology driving Marxism pushes toward total destruction of an enemy. And like that's the only motivation that can be rallied, is to destroy by violence. And he says, you know, not only does this anthropological, you know, misunderstanding frustrate people, it never really succeeds in motivating them, because it can't. That's right. It's baseless. And that when that regime fell apart, it wasn't even from direct war, but it was mostly from the regimes being unable to prevent their citizenry from searching for the truth.
That's right.
And from claiming their own freedom. Yeah. It's this idea that, like, unless you have basically a fear to motivate people against their own interests, when the people realize, oh, you don't have anything here other than trying to cause terror, but we're not afraid of that because we're dedicated to the truth, then like no power structure can actually maintain itself, you know, in being.
And he's very bullish on, like, he says, it's essentially, this is an act of God that, despite these very violent, oppressive tendencies that were inherent in this regime, this workers' movement, this individual and community and nationwide, in some instances, movement towards nonviolent pushing back out of a source of their freedom, their dignity, their desire for the truth.
Yeah.
It was able to undo this without a cataclysmic Third World War.
Right.
It was able to do this where eventually the authorities just kind of like they did surrender to this reality that emerged in this moment, that you can't terrorize and oppress your way into peace and submission and you know, order and all these things. And he talks about in paragraph 26, talked about like this, the church has an element of responsibility in how this happens. It's not just kind of you can't just say, oh, this was just a Polish movement, or this was an East German movement, or this was a Hungarian movement, or something like that. He said the first consequence was an encounter in some countries between the church and the workers' movement, which came about as a result of an ethical and explicitly Christian reaction against a widespread situation of injustice. So the places where this happened, he talks about this elsewhere, is like, it's really from the fact that these are Christian peoples, that they've been formed by the church for 1,000+ years. And in the end, when they were searching for this, as they navigated the void of their society, economic depression, workers' injustices, hardships, all these kinds of things, the thing that they ended up recovering was not a newfangled idea of democracy and freedom or something like that. It was, we're Christians, and like the church has already said a lot about what direction we need to take for our country, for our flourishing. And this was most evident in his home, where we left off last time, in Poland, as these worker strikes, motivated entirely by Catholic social teaching in some senses, and by Catholics, dyed-in-the-wool Catholics like Lech Walesa, they just kind of gained ground over time, and that was their rallying call, was this sense of identity as Polish Catholics. So he wants to make sure that we know that, like, you can't, like, if the West is going to consider itself like we won,
victorious,
you didn't do without the inborn Christian anthropology that you can't root out of these people, no matter how many years they've been under the Iron Curtain.
Well, and the solution also in the long term to maintain, right, what we said, to maintain peace, not just the absence of a war, is going to mean continuing to build on that foundation of an authentic anthropology, so that you don't swing from a totalitarian repressive regime where there's no freedoms and there in turn is economic suffering, but there's other kinds of sufferings too. You go from that to, well, we're going to show you how to run your country like we run the Gap, man. We're selling a lot of stuff. We're generating a lot of profit. So we got the solutions for you. You just got to get a good product, sell it at a good margin, and you're going to be happy and take care of everything you need. It's like, well, that's not going to do it on its own, right? Yep. We need, that's a good 80s reference. The Gap.
So good.
That you need a comprehensive understanding of what a person is, what a community is, and all of that fabric has to be rebuilt. So he says that, this is in paragraph 27, he says, for a long time, the most elementary economic relationships he's talking about within the Eastern European countries that were suffering under communism, they were distorted, and basic virtues of economic life, such as truthfulness, trustworthiness, and hard work, were denigrated. A patient material and moral reconstruction is needed, even as people exhausted by long-standing privation are asking for their governments for tangible and immediate results in the form of material benefits and an adequate fulfillment of their legitimate aspirations. So it almost sounds to me like I've heard this, that if someone was dehydrated, they got lost in the desert and passed out or something. They've been extremely dangerously dehydrated. If you just let them drink as much water as they want, somehow it kills them. I don't understand how that works. So you have to give them a little bit and then gradually accustom them and get them back into health. And then, at some point then they can probably drink water and not worry about killing themselves. John Paul II is saying that there's got to be a patient, material, and moral reconstruction, because you can't flip-flop immediately from an economy where your fundamental mood is you can't trust the government at all into an economy where you can trust the market. It's always going to be fair, and there's just, that's it. You don't have to worry about anything. It's all good. You have to relearn how to trust people, and that's got to be hard. I can't imagine what that's like to go from one of those situations and even try and make your way into the other.
That's like so this is a perfect quote to pull out here. So he's seeing, these Eastern Europe, take Romania, for example, or any Eastern European nation. If you have that memory, like, what do they want? They want MTV, they want Coca-Cola, they want jeans from the Gap.
The Gap.
And there was a powerful cultural moment. It happened after this encyclical. Metallica. I don't know if you've heard about this.
I mean, I know Metallica.
Metallica played a concert in Moscow in September of 1991.
Wow.
Okay. The low-end estimate of the number of people who went to the concert is 600,000. The high-end estimate is 1.5 million people went to just see Metallica. And it's one of the YouTube people. It's one of the most legendary. And that was that kind of thing, though, where it was like these people emerge out of these decades of privation.
Yeah.
John Paul II's like, you guys need to rebuild relationships, trust with each other. You got to remember what it's like to be a person again.
Yeah.
And he's like, this whole reality of like ship truckloads of Coke and blue jeans and Metallica over and just like, you're going to be a Western nation now. He's like, it's going to hurt. You're going to injure yourself by imbibing this materialistic consumer.
Well, it's like a Rumspringa. Right, like you're set free from your Amish like confines to go and explore the world. And I don't know if you've ever seen any documentaries about like it's like that kind of a thing. I have seen the movie Kingpin, but I actually watched a serious documentary about Rumspringas one time. Despite my looks, I occasionally know some obscure historical things. Well, I was thinking too, as you described, Coca-Cola and blue jeans, like there's. In Stranger Things, Hopper breaks into a little warehouse in the USSR, and it's literally blue jeans and Jif peanut butter.
Oh yeah,
and then there's like guns and some other non-savory things, but that you can't just flip a switch, and that it's not going to be a simple victory of culture. Yeah. And that even the idea of a victory of culture is a little dangerous. Like John Paul II wanted an authentic Polish culture or Ukrainian culture or whatever. He would never want to say, now that we erased all of the terrible economic sufferings that you were, undergoing, we're going to give you a whole new culture. But that's kind of what comes with the materialism and the marketing, right? And the sort of the greed and pride of the victors that are like, we're gonna teach you how to be, just like us. Like, hey, it's only $13 a month, man. You didn't need that Netflix, and you can watch anything you want. This is how we do it.
Yep.
It's like you don't need that.
Yep.
So there's just so much packed in here.
Well, this excursus on 1989. He gives three final cautionary sentences at the end of 29. Says the recognition of these rights. It is important to reaffirm. So basically, this is my warning to you, world. The old forms of totalitarianism and authoritarianism are not yet completely vanquished. Indeed, there is a risk that they will regain their strength. This demands renewed efforts of cooperation and solidarity between all countries. AKA, if you think it's time to dance on the graves of your enemies, nope, it's time to cooperate and help them reemerge and become your friends and your partners.
Yes.
There is. In the developed countries, there's an excessive promotion of purely utilitarian values with an appeal to the appetites and inclinations towards immediate gratification, making it difficult to recognize and respect the hierarchy of the true values of the human existence. And then he goes on a little bit longer. He talks about there's an emerging religious fanaticism, which I think he's referring to the rising in some religiously fundamentally motivated terrorism that is emerging in the 80s and the early 90s, and we'll see it unfortunately culminate in the horrors of 9/11 and stuff. But basically, like, okay, in Europe it seems like we're kind of having this moment, but the rest of the world is developing beyond this purview of Soviet Union versus the United States of America. So the 30s, the paragraphs here in the 30s reconfigure the basic things we've seen throughout all the social encyclicals so far.
Private property, universal destination of human goods, participation, solidarity. And he's, talking now in the 90s, right? Yep. I think we talked about microprocessors last time, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
So he's talking about in the 90s about the importance of making sure that people are able to keep up with change. So he says in paragraph 32, in our time in particular, this is talking about ownership, but he says there exists another form of ownership, which is becoming no less important than the land, right? And it is the possession of knowledge, or what's know-how in this Vatican translation. The possession of know-how, technology, and skill. And then this is a very insightful sentence. The wealth of the industrialized nations is based much more on this kind of ownership than on natural resources. And I mean, I think about where we are
100%.
today. Amazon, sure, owns some land, right? But that's like purely instrumental in their success. Their success has much more to do with all of the technological capacity and the intellectual development that then uses land or whatever stuff. But Jeff Bezos isn't where he is because he's in real estate.
Yeah. He's probably, out of all of them, he's probably the closest to it because he's, got warehouses that
and
all these kinds of things. But
it all functions on the technology,
Exactly. Yeah. This it's such an important thing, by the way, to understand in terms of our own economy. Like, I wouldn't want to belabor. Sometimes you would think like, oh my gosh, I bet Amazon has so much money. They own so much property. And it's like, they do, but it's like, it's a warehouse here on 4 acres and it's a warehouse there on 10 acres. With like feudal lords in the old days had, hundreds of thousands of acres, of like farmland and forests and all these kinds of things. And it's just like that there's just such a disparity between land does not equal power and wealth anymore.
Right.
Necessarily.
Yeah.
And it talks about, again, the same kind of themes we saw in Populorum Progressio. This
authentic development.
And he talks about, I think that the word he uses, he steals it from, I think, Pope Paul VI. There's another word for peace. It is called development, I think.
Yes, he does. Yeah, he steals that phrase. Yep.
So basically, if you've seen it on a bumper sticker, if you want justice, work for peace. If you want peace, I think it's work for development or something along those lines. That basically, if you want to avoid cataclysmic confrontations, you better invest in these places that are lagging behind, and you can't just use them as a market to sell your stuff. You have to develop their know-how, their skills. Yeah,
he talks about consumerism in this section, which you've already hinted on a little bit, but I just want to read a little bit from paragraph 36. He says, there's basically a phenomenon of consumerism arising. He says, in singling out new needs and new means to meet them, one must be guided by a comprehensive picture of man which respects all the dimensions of his being and which subordinates his material and instinctive dimensions to his interior and spiritual ones. If, on the contrary, a direct appeal is made to his instincts, while ignoring in various ways the reality of the person as intelligent and free, then consumer attitudes and lifestyles can be created which are objectively improper and often damaging to his physical and spiritual health. And that just doing the opposite of that is basically how every contemporary form of technology has succeeded. And it's like, we're just not going to do that. We're going to play into instincts, needs, immediate satisfaction. And so then he goes on to say, because of this, the difficulty of stopping that, he says there's a great deal of educational and cultural work urgently needed, including the education of consumers in the responsible use of their power of choice, the formation of a strong sense of responsibility among producers and among people in the mass media in particular, as well as necessary intervention by public authorities. And, think of a real super small intervention. There's a growing movement among schools, middle schools and high schools that are making an effort to say, we don't want you to have your phones in this building. And it's like going to war to achieve something that basic. Or like your cell phone stays in your locker off. Even that, that has become so part of like the way the world is that any pushback against it, even when it's based on well-researched data about the negative impacts of those kinds of devices on education, and it's like, boy, you better be ready to fight if that's that's going to be the position that you take.
People are habituated to a consumeristic mentality, consuming of things. He goes, we had microprocessor last time. This is a great thing you highlighted. The example he gives then of this ill-formed consumerist mentality, he says it's evidenced in widespread drug use. Is a sign of serious malfunction in the social system. And this is the 80s, man. The 80s into the 90s, all the things, cocaine, heroin, marijuana had been around beforehand and stuff like that. But like, especially in U.S. culture, you know, think about the narco wars it's all ticking up because the consumerist mentality is just overwhelming people's cultural and educational kind of sense of their own dignity. And you know, this is, if you're a libertarian and you're listening to this, guys, this is it's not just, can you find a good market and at a good price and sell a good product, or even a bad product? It's like, whatever people will pay for. That's their own responsibility. Pope John Paul II was like, no. Yeah. You, like, the society must.
So, I mean, it's just the converse of whatever my employee agrees to work for is a just wage.
Yep.
If that's not legitimate in discussing what a wage is, it is also not legitimate to say, well, I make a product and people pay for it and there's a market for it.
Yep.
So it must be good.
Yep.
You know. Yeah. Yeah, the drug use, and I mean that language, like, it's a sign of a, what did you say? I know I had it here. It is it's the paragraph above. A sign of a serious malfunction in the social system. It implies a materialistic and, in a certain sense, destructive reading of human needs. In this way, the innovative capacity of a free economy is brought to a one-sided and inadequate conclusion. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't just be making money because people will pay for it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's terrible.
To wrap up, paragraph 42, I just found this is worthy of just kind of a long block quote.
Just so y'all see, I mean, it's just written all over it. All of this stuff, it's like, oh, what a great statement. We got to talk about the whole thing. It would have been easier to highlight the stuff that we weren't going to try and talk about. So,
to summarize this whole thing about Marxism and socialism versus capitalism, democracy, all these things, paragraph 42. Returning now to the initial question, can it perhaps be said that after the failure of communism, capitalism is the victorious social system, and that capitalism should be the goal of the countries now making efforts to rebuild their economy and society? The answer is obviously complex. If by quote-unquote capitalism is meant an economic system which recognizes the fundamental and positive role of business, the market, private property, and the resulting responsibility for the means of production, as well as the free human creativity in the economic sector, then the answer is certainly in the affirmative. So if that's what you mean by capitalism, responsibility, market, business, but all kind of emphasizing human creativity, great, that's great. And he says, but if by capitalism is meant a system in which freedom in the economic sector is not circumscribed within a strong juridical framework, which places it at the service of human freedom in its totality, and which sees it as a particular aspect of that freedom, the core of which is ethical and religious, then the reply is certainly negative. So it is. This is the fine line the church tries to walk, which is like, capitalism's good. Yep. What do you mean by capitalism? What do you mean by business? What do you mean by markets? What do you mean by, if you view it as kind of whatever the magic hand of capitalism does is that's just what it does. Whatever the markets do is what they're going to do. No. But if we're talking about enterprise and business and creativity and creating and all, then heck yes, this is great. So these moments that we live every day in our own economy, which is like you see these positive aspects of capitalism, again, enterprise, entrepreneurship, creating jobs, helping people find dignity in their work and their value and all this kind of wonderful. And then you see rapacious, find a consumer and sell a product to him. And if the government says anything to try and curtail my free enterprise rights, I will pay an unholy amount of money to get that person voted out of Congress and make sure they don't have anything else to say. And I will defeat that bill because the market must be free. So, anyhow, where can we wrap up? We've got a few minutes left. We've got a lot of stuff here towards the end. I think just it kind of returns to John Paul II's big vision. Most of his encyclicals, his 14 encyclicals, are not social encyclicals. They're mostly on Christology. Mm-hmm. We talked about pneumatology with the Holy Spirit, discipleship. It's all of it. All leads back to the sense that Catholic social teaching is a version of Christian theology and anthropology being explained in circumstances here. It is not an end. And by this time in the church, there is kind of like a wing of we're social justice Catholics, or something like that.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you feel like I don't mean that in a certain way, but there's been sort of party line bifurcation where it's like, well, Catholic social teaching is more for this side of the aisle.
Yeah.
It's kind of like its own thing. It's great. And it's like, John Paul says, no, it's for everybody. It's a function of our theological perspective on all things.
It's a method of evangelization.
Yep.
So there's just maybe to close, we can say there's good, clear recognition. I don't have the particular paragraph pulled up here, but John Paul II uses language describing his own contribution here in this document and in the other documents of this tradition to recognize that they play a particular function as an experiment in offering solutions, right, to some of the problems some of the new things, rerum novarum, that are being faced, but that they are all grounded in some of these certain doctrines and dogmas, such as human dignity and the right to property and the universal destination of human goods and those things, but that the particulars are the particular interventions are meant to help us think about those principles and not just to say, here's the answer to these problems, but that in all of it, the act of the church attempting to address particular problems in the modern world is in itself a form of evangelization, wherein we remember the identity of man created in the image and likeness of God, the concept of creation as a gift to be stewarded responsibly, the idea of our solidarity and our responsibility for each other, and the goal of having everyone participate in a meaningful human community, that all of those things are grounded by the message of salvation history, of the gospel, and that when the church brings forth an attempt to talk to modern man about the questions that we're facing, like Leo XIV just did, it's not because we just don't like all this stuff that's going on, and we're going to tell you to go back to your rooms and just be quiet. It's because we're trying to ultimately call you back to the idea that we have a mission to offer salvation that Christ gave us, right? And that we are all in need of it, and that when we forget those things and try to just push them aside to the margins, we lose any hope of being able to come up with a coherent answer to any of the problems that our world is facing. So he wants to say this is a form of evangelization. This entire style of teaching is a form of evangelization which tries to keep the proclamation of salvation at the center of it and then enter into fruitful conversations to restore people's attention to the dignity of the human person, to our freedom and our basic commitment to the truth, so that we can then have a society which functions a little bit better because it's gotten the foundational anthropological question correct.
Salvation first, proclamation of the gospel first, know who you are, man, in light of who God is, and then you'll figure everything else out.
Yep, that's right.
Well, cool.
It's easy. That's all you got to do. And then go to the Gap. So...
That's a great place to end. Well, the next chapter in our Catholic social teaching series, we haven't landed on if we want to go straight to Pope Benedict. There's one after this that is not classified usually as a social encyclical, Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. I think we gotta
have to do that one.
We got to do it.
Skip that one.
It is so. It's not much. It's not so much a social encyclical as focusing on economic theory and this classic, what we've been talking about for 100 years here, but it's about
culture, though.
It's about how does the gospel figure out its way into culture, politics, legislation. And again, what we'll see here is like the warning to the West.
Yep.
You better be careful. I think if you read Evangelium Vitae, as you'll see, is like he comes down hard on kind of this is what your consumeristic, individualistic nightmare. It is destroying human beings.
These kinds of motivations being fostered without regard for the foundation of them has errors far outside of spending habits.
Yep.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah,
right,
we got to do it.
We're doing it. Well, we'll get on that train in no time, guys. I should have mentioned at the beginning, we had a great last episode with Father Tim Halida, the rector of the Co-Cathedral St. Thomas More, to end our pastor series. And then after this episode, 2 weeks' time, we're going to get Bishop Walk on here. He's getting ready for his own pilgrimage to go over to Assisi in Rome. So we're going to do a little excursion on St. Francis of Assisi.
I forgot to mention, I went to Assisi.
Hey, you did.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I
you did.
I got to see the tomb of Francis and Clare.
Yep. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll have you back. Bishop will be taking you through that, and have a great 2 weeks in the meantime.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Gaudium et Spes podcast. If you would like to know more about our podcast, please visit our website, gaudiumετspes.net, or go to ptdiocese.org and click the button that says podcast. If you listen to the audio version from an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave us a comment there as well. Thank you for joining us.